Hi everyone, and welcome back to ShowCloud's Cyber Threat Briefing. I'm here and joined by Hugh Rayner, resident podcaster and consultant here at ShowCloud within the team. Hi Hugh.
Hiya.
Good, so welcome back to 2023, kicking things off nice. We had a little short break in December, but we're back now to give you the insights, the things that are going off in the industry, the things to be concerned about, the areas to be interested in. And we've got three nice topics for you to start off the year with. And we're going to try and cover things from the previous 2 months, so December and things in January, but keeping it quite relevant. So back in December, there was an incident with LastPass, and we're going to cover that in a little bit more depth. There was earlier this month, one of Slack's GitHub repositories was breached, if you like, a data leak from it, if you like. We're going to cover that as well. And then recently, just now, there was some reports in the news around President Biden and confidential documents. So having, protectively marked documents even at his home address. And we're going to talk about that in the context of an organisation. So what does that mean for listeners? What does that mean for businesses? You know, ultimately that's at a presidential level. But clearly there are lessons to take from that into your everyday work. So Hugh, shall we get to it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, so the LastPass incident. So back in December, there was a fairly major incident, and obviously we didn't do a cyber threat briefing back then, so we're going to cover it today. I think it's still a relevant thing. I think there's still a question to be had around whether password managers are really secure. You know, should we be using them? There's obviously been a breach here. You know, there's a single point of trust, a single point of failure, if you like. And the attack, essentially, rather than the impact, I'll talk about the impact, it's probably a better thing to talk about, which is that private vaults, so people's, LastPass customers, their private vaults were obtained by an attacker, taken away, and now will be able to be accessed if they have the credentials for those vaults or the passphrase of that vault. Now, obviously, there needs to be something to happen to get access to that vault, but crucially, they have this kind of encrypted vault, this encrypted area, like if you like, and there's interesting things in there, so secrets and credentials and so on and so forth. So Hugh, I invite you for your feedback on this one. So what's your thoughts around this attack? What's your immediate kind of takeaways from it?
Well, I think it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because we've got quite a few different password managers available on the market, and LastPass seem to be disproportionately affected by this sort of thing. They've had the incident earlier in the year, which was reported as being resolved. Turned out that wasn't resolved, and it was actually just worsening. So for them, it's certainly not not a great run of events. Certainly, I think on the whole, especially the concept of password managers are fantastic, right? To allow you to have well chosen, secure, long, complex passwords that you don't have to remember for every service, all sort of wrapped around that one master password is really useful, and certainly for organisations that aren't using them, or individuals that aren't using them, they definitely are a good tool, on the proviso that your master password is strong. You certainly want multi-factor authentication on your password manager as well. I prefer hardware-based. So I've got to plug in my YubiKey to be able to unlock my vault. But with a really strong master password and multi-factor, you're in a pretty good place. Even in the event like this where vaults get compromised.
Okay, perfect. So there's quite a lot of users for LastPass. It's quite a popular product. And if there's people listening now that wasn't aware of this attack, didn't know it had happened, what are the things that they should be doing right this second to safeguard their LastPass accounts and the things that are stored in there?
Yeah, I guess so. So the first point to make is if your credentials, your vault is stolen, you are still as secure as your master password. So because of the compromise, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of the data within your vault is compromised. It just means that the attacker then has the ability and the time, crucially, to sit and try infinite numbers of password combinations to try and get the password to your vault. Computationally, that's difficult, so if your master password is of a suitable length and complexity, then you're probably fine, but certainly, given that a lot of password managers these days also contain functionality to automatically rotate passwords on, quite a good number these days of websites. Certainly giving that a go would be good. If you feel that your master password is weaker, less than sort of 14 characters, then yeah, absolutely, you want to get rotating all of those passwords even manually.
Okay, so that's the key takeaway, right? So it's to rotate those passwords that are in that vault. So people should still have access to the vault. Have a look in there and start to rotate your passwords around. And you're not wrong. So it is I guess it's a matter of time. So if you got dog123 as your master password, probably not going to take too long to crack it and get in there. But if you've got something quite complex, then the time frame will be quite a lot longer. Now, there's a couple of provisos to that, which is there's an assumption that LastPass should be using standard or well-known cryptographic libraries and algorithms. If they've kind of rolled their own crypto, that might be another problem. There could be an issue found within there. I'm not saying they have, but that could be an angle to think about. And so I guess the point is now it's a ticking time bomb ultimately, right? Could be anything from now to multiple years down the line. So the moment's certainly not past, right? So people can still make this change and do this kind of recycling of passwords now, right?
Absolutely, and I guess you touch on it there, right? Just because at the moment your master password is long enough to be cryptographically secure, and that it would take an infeasible amount of time for an attacker to crack that and brute force it. If you're like some people and you use the same passwords on services for 10 years' time, well, I don't want to make any guarantees or bets now on what the strength of this cryptography in 10 years, right? Technology advances fast.
It does, yeah. And I should point out that my own master password is not dog123. I just use that as an example. I saw a lot of people, in and around LinkedIn. There's quite a bit of noise in the industry, a lot of voices. People saying, got to drop LastPass now. You can't believe people can't still be using these after yesterday. Get out now. I wouldn't ever advocate against a particular service. I think, we could stand here and say, use another provider, and then another provider tomorrow has an issue, right? So it's a tricky bit of a ground for us to say that, and I think it has to come down to a personal decision for people. What's your level, risk appetite? What kind of threats do you perceive to be in your threat model, and then work accordingly from that. If you believe that you're not particularly targeted or you're not particularly interested in individual, which 90% of us aren't, then maybe it's going to be okay. You could do that cycling activity and move on from there.
I mean, certainly, if your choice is between LastPass and not using a password manager, then LastPass would have to suffer quite a few more issues before I'd suggest that not using a password manager was the better option.
Yeah, and that does actually lead to my next question, which is something's better than nothing, I'm assuming, right? So, you just touched on it there, Hugh, and gave me the answer before I asked the question, which is we would advocate for having something over nothing. And actually, there's a lot of people walking with a password manager in their pocket. I personally use my iPhone, and it has the password functionality there that's stored into the iCloud, using biometrics to access it. That's my, what I use for my personal stuff, and then for work we do have a separate password manager on the work machine. So yes, I think there is a huge argument for using them. I think they've got a massive place, and what they do is they make it quite frictionless. So you add in quite a good level of security in a frictionless manner, so it's a bit more achievable for the wider general public, and not just kind of security bodies like us who will always kind of go for that sort of thing as well. So are the mitigating factors in place here? So yes, my vault might have got stolen and someone may have got access to it. Are those credentials always reusable straight away, or is there something else that could be in place that stops that?
Well, like we've suggested on many of these sessions before, your accounts should ideally be protected with multi-factor authentication as well. Which I suppose, given the way that some of these password managers have advanced, is also an additional area of interest, right? A lot of these password managers now allow you to store multi-factor codes inside that password manager itself, which I think for organizations with shared accounts is really useful, because then you don't have a single person responsible for maintaining that MFA code. But I think probably my approach would be to store MFA in a separate application, sort of giving you a decent level of assurance that unless both of both the password manager and your multi-factor service get compromised at exactly the same time, you've got time to rotate, from one to the other. I think that, yes, it's very frictionless, like you say, to have passwords and multi-factor in one service, but then you are putting a lot of faith in that one service.
You are, yeah. Like I said before, it's a single point of failure, so yeah, something certainly to consider. That being said, we all, ultimately convenience trumps sometimes. If it's there, it gives you the option to go and put the MFA code in the password manager. Am I going to click it? Yeah, probably I do sometimes. But what people might do is consider a layered approach. They might go, yeah, you know what, this is my email account. It's the most central piece of my online identity. I won't put that in there. I'll put that in an out of band, token generate like authenticator or something like that, or I'll use a hardware token, as you previously mentioned, Hugh. That might be the way to do it, to tier it up a little bit, so that you might have accounts in your online vault, password manager vault, that you really don't care about. There's no card details stored in there. You just needed somewhere to store a semi-secure password. Okay, maybe they're okay to keep the codes in with, but maybe select your top kind of 3, 4, 5 services, have an out-of-band authenticator mechanism for them, and go through that way.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, right? I mean, certainly you touch on it. Your email account is your holy grail, right? Almost all password reset functionality offers password resets via your email, so that is the one to keep very, very well secured.
Indeed, it is. Yeah. To turn this into an organisational conversation, are there learnings that organisations can take here around password managers? What are kind of the key takeaways you would give to the listeners on that one? Yeah,
so I guess there's sort of two sides of this, right? There is that enterprise use of password managers, which for like we discussed, managing shared accounts, especially with multi-factor, things like that, allowing certain individuals to access credentials for a set period of time, monitoring their usage, seeing when they're rotated and things like that. Password managers are fantastic, as long as they're configured well from that enterprise standpoint. But then if you're also offering employees the ability to have their own personal vaults with their own master passwords, it is obviously also important to have that education piece around the importance and the significance of that master password, so that we don't end up with dog123 as the master password for our employees, because obviously then any credential matter that employee has access to through their master password, it's the weakest point of failure, right? So your shared credentials are only as strong as the weakest password used by your employees.
Yeah, and so you tell me that dog123 is not a good
absolutely
master
dog123
right, okay.
is not good.
Okay, I think I need some extra training in that case.
I need to change a few things.
Yeah. Okay, good. So as always, right, so it's a layered approach. So yes, we can put a password manager in for people. That is better than writing it down into a notebook or sticking a post-it on your screen or using something shared across many different logins. So yeah, we've got a technical control, but similarly, there's got to be some awareness training, some usage training, some policy procedures. The kind of wraparound piece to give that extra layer of this is how we use it, this is how we use it sensibly, and kind of add a people element to that matrix. Because we don't live in a perfect world. Not everything's technology and not everything's people. There is a crossover of things. So this multi-layered approach, we talk about this quite regularly on the threat briefing, has been the ultimate way to get around things. No silver bullet, right? Fantastic. Okay, so I think we might have covered LastPass there on this particular one. So shall we move on to the next topic, which is a piece of news that was around a few weeks ago related to Slack. So the news article was talking about that Slack, they store their code repository for the platform, the application, the product in GitHub, and there was a breach of that repository. And by breach here, we don't mean that someone's dropped a backdoor onto the server, got into it that way. It could be anything ranging from a publicly accessible repository that wasn't supposed to be publicly accessible, some leaked credentials that someone's then used to log in. So there's multiple aspects to how that happens, but the impact is essentially that the code base, or parts of the code base at least, have allegedly been stolen by an attack group, a threat actor, ultimately. So, Hugh, this is not an uncommon attack, right? So we've seen similar versions of this previously that have affected other companies, not Slack, but other ones as well. So can you just give us an example of one that we've seen in the recent past?
Yeah, so I guess this is quite similar to the incident that affected Okta a short while ago, and certainly I think it's something that we're seeing our clients getting more interested in. Things like securing and looking at the configuration of the wider sort of CI/CD pipeline, especially including these third-party platforms where we're storing a lot of either very sensitive IP or credential matter, access keys, and that sort of thing. Certainly it's a hot topic right now.
Okay, and we're seeing more people. I guess it's that blurred lines, right? So previously you would have had your code repository within your internal network. You would have had a VPN into it, or you would have been in the office to access it, and therefore you kind of got this outer layer. And we're seeing that blurred quite a lot now. So we're starting to, and not just now, but over the last 5, 6, 7 years, we're starting to see a lot more usage of cloud-based services. So things like cloud-based, cloud-native. So you don't have that host. Yes, you can host your own Git server internally if you want, but if you want to use the publicly provided version of it, either freely or paid for, then that's sitting out there on the cloud, right? And so you're reliant on other factors then to provide that level of access control ultimately, and that layer of security that surrounds it. It's quite common now that you would see that, and I suspect people, if you said to someone, "Can you tell me about your external perimeter?" be shocked if they actually said, "Well, you know what? We've got these IPs over here, these physical locations here, and we use GitHub, and we use this kind of service provider, this cloud service." They might forget that middle category, presume because someone else it's somewhere else, it's kind of out there attack surface, and it's not actually. So it is part of an organisation's digital footprint. It's part of their external attack surface, and indeed the information you do find in especially a GitHub repository is and can be regularly used in attacks. It can form informative steps within an attack chain. So it's really important that clients and organisations get a real good handle on what's out there, where the data sits, what controls are surrounding that, who has access to it, how do they monitor access to it, how do they respond to access to it that's unauthorised, and so on and so forth. So there's quite a lot of aspects to it. Now there's this kind of ever swelling attack surface that really needs to be kind of kept under control.
I think with these SaaS products and services, they're operating in such a hyper-competitive market that a lot of the time it's got to be really quick and easy to set up and deploy these SaaS services and integrate them into your processes in your organization. So if at the time you're signing up for the service, you do have to sit down and configure all of these options and enable commit signing and multi-factor on every user's account. It's going to make it harder to get to deploy those utilities, which is going to reduce the uptake of that software. So that's why a lot of these SaaS products they're not insecure in their default configuration, but they're not hardened to the extent that perhaps the rest of your organization would be.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And I suppose there are benefits to this, right? So you've mentioned it early on there, convenience. So you can get up and running with a GitHub repository within 5 minutes, let's say. It's all there, it's all working. To do that same level of effort internally, you're talking quite a vast amount of effort, right? Plus someone to maintain it, someone to look after the server, another thing to keep patched and updated, right? So absolutely. Definite benefits for using it that way, of course, yeah. And then you kind of got to temper that with, we are now starting to expand outwards a little bit, and we need to get a rein on that, put a net around it, if you like. We've talked about there, so I guess we kind of covered the recommendations here. So it's knowing what you've got, knowing what's out there, knowing what services you're using, knowing where your data sits, what's out there, and ultimately classifying the data. I think could be quite an important thing. Getting that out there. We'll cover a little bit more of data classification in the next piece. Acknowledging that your attack surface expanded. It's not just your actual perimeter and your internet-facing routers and firewalls and things like that, but it's this vaster circle of bits and pieces that are out there that make up your organisational digital footprint. Good. 3 key points, Hugh. So what are 3 things that an organisation can take away out of that little snippet there for us to kind of action today?
Yeah, so I'd say definitely audit and understand your public and your private presence on SaaS, code repositories, things like that. Definitely want to know what's public, what's private, how that's protected, and the sensitivity of that data in there. You can go further with that audit. There are tools and utilities there that will go through public repositories, and they will look for things that they consider to be sensitive. Any access keys, anything labeled passwords, things like that. That can be really useful and valuable. So I guess that's one of them. We can just understand the configuration and the controls there, and make sure that the configuration of that SaaS service is going to be in line with the rest of your IT security policy. Could obviously be a really good one. And I guess looking for a third one, for specifically looking at these code repositories, is understanding and making the development team aware of the access that they've got, because the way that these have to work, right, is that everyone needs the ability to add to that repository and pull from it. So making again, like we've been discussing in the password managers, making sure your employees are aware of the importance of maintaining good hygiene and security around the credential matter that they hold.
Yeah, and not checking in credentials and keys for various servers into code bases.
Yeah,
probably avoid that one if we can. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Hugh. So last, third and final point for this briefing is around a news article. So President Biden, and I will throw in the words here allegedly, because I think it's important that we do that, it's been reported that he had classified documents in his home. Now, obviously, his home is not the White House. That's a clear differentiator here. And so there's what they consider to be a security breach of those documents, I think is how it's kind of playing out here. We're not here to necessarily comment on that piece of news or anything like that, but what we can do is take some lessons from that. So, Hugh, how does that piece of news relate to regular businesses? Because clearly that's a presidential level discussion point. That's happening at the White House and the president level of the USA. How can a regular business take a lesson from that? What can they learn from it?
Well, there are some quite clear analogues, aren't there? Especially in today's world. A lot of people working from home, whether that's in a hybrid role where you're spending some time in the office, some time at home, and taking things back and forth. The level of the risk presented to your organisation is therefore somewhat related to the security of your own employees' homes. You might spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on nice secure access control system for your office, locked cabinets, well written and organised policies on maintaining secure data and things like that. But then if your employees are taking that home, you have no assurance over those the security there, whether things are left out. Most people probably don't lock things away in their cabinets at home, right? So there's obviously that risk there. Even in fully remote roles and things like that, and not looking at physical stuff. People we see it all the time, right? People working on documents at work needs finishing off over the weekend. They'll just email themselves that document, crack on with it on the weekend, and then email it back to them when they're back in the office. Again, all of the data security controls that you're applying to that just don't apply. And they're lost when they're on that user's personal device. Okay,
so you're taking it straight out of the environment that is controlled ultimately into an uncontrolled environment,
exactly.
And therefore the controls that previously existed not necessarily there anymore, which is a completely valid point. Yeah. So the impact, right? So could be anything from loss of customer data, organisational data, trade secrets, if it was that severe. PII, essentially. I suppose you could lose employees' personal identifiable information. So there's quite a big impact here, right? But I guess crucially, and I suppose we will counter this with context is key. So it's all well and good picking up a piece of paper off, a bus seat that has a couple of names on, but if there's no indication of the company name on it, what it's useful for, any other kind of contextual information, it does lose its value a little bit. So it is all about the context. If you're losing big piles of documents and a big box of paperwork. That's probably got quite a lot of context, so I'm a little bit concerned about that. The odd piece of paper here and there probably has a lesser impact. I'm not trivialising it. It's obviously not great, but I kind of want to suggest that there's levels of impact to this, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and the bus. I'm sure I read and remember a few years back there was something around someone leaving fairly sensitive data on a bus seat, and that's why I mentioned it. I think that's been around a little bit. Don't know if it was government level, UK government level, perhaps.
I think so. Yeah.
But it happens, right? And it could be a bus seat, a train seat, a train table. You kind of see people working on trains regularly that are typing away, need to pop to the loo, leave all their stuff everywhere. Machines unlocked. Obviously, that's a major concern, but there's paperwork everywhere. I've seen that happen, regularly and recently. Coffee shops would be another example. Like you said, breaking into people's houses, car getting broken into. You've got sensitive documents in your car and you parked it up overnight. So yeah, multitude of different environments that can happen that's not necessarily the workplace anymore. So the next question is, how do we fix that? So what are the steps that an organisation can take to reduce this type of thing? And I don't suggest we'll ever get rid of it properly, but what can we do to reduce it?
Oh, there's little things we can do, right? In relation to some of the aspects you were talking about there, about working in trains and coffee shops. Just things like privacy filters and that on your laptop, can be great for stopping things like shoulder surfing. From a more organisational perspective, now I think it's probably going to be the third time of mentioning this, right? Data classification. We talked about it in choosing which services to potentially include in your password manager. Talked about it in relation to the Slack's GitHub breach, and now again, data classification is really important here. So the policy might be that these documents are okay to be printed out and exist in physical copies, because obviously as soon as anything exists as a physical copy, and none of your technological controls apply to it. The contrast to that would be you say, okay, these things don't get printed. Controls like that can help manage control over your data. Great, some of the cloud-based offerings, especially within like Azure and the Microsoft suite, around automated data classification. There, things that will prevent those documents from being emailed out, being accessed by individuals within the organisation outside of certain groups. The world has come a long way in a very short space of time, I think, around some of that data classification.
It has, yeah, and it's all about being seamless. So you're quite right, the Azure stuff, there's products like AIP, for example, that will often be bundled into most people's license levels if they're a Microsoft house. And that'll do automatic thing. Obviously, there's a huge rule-based engine that you need to set up, but that'll do automatic tracking of and classification of documents. And then you can tie that into DLP solutions, so you can track where a document's gone. Is it being lost? Has it gone somewhere else that we didn't want it to go to? And I think then we come back to the point we made earlier on across actually all three of these stories. It's a layered approach, so you can put technical controls in place, encourage users not to print things that are marked sensitively. And then there's the people layer, right? So regular training and awareness sessions. So don't forget, this is how we classify documents here at this company, and this is what we do with them, this is what we don't print, this is why we don't print them, here's a policy that outlines all this kind of stuff. So there's multiple layers, again, as there always is, to kind of solve this issue, right? And I think there's a couple of things we could have, and we are taking, and hopefully the audience can take from the things that have happened across the pond with the guy in charge. Excellent. I think that covers everything for this episode. So that's 2 months in a nutshell. But Hugh, thank you very much for your attendance, your contribution, as always, much appreciated. And I look forward to speaking to you in a month's time.